What's up, heathens? How y'all doing? I'm the Godless Engineer, and I critically analyze apologist claims to give you the best arguments and information so that you can stand up and use your voice. Today, we're gonna go all the way back to the beginning of the debunk series on the channel, Reasons for Hope. They're gonna lay out a rock-solid case that there is good evidence to suggest a God exists in an attempt to refute a common atheist claim. That would be the idea that there's no good evidence for God's existence. I'm very interested to see what they think is good evidence for God's existence because I have yet to see any. If you want to fuck around and find out what they think is good evidence for God's existence, then please stay tuned.
Lots of people say there's no evidence for God. Well, we're going to knock that one out in three. I'm just going to have to keep it simple, throw in the old 1-2 combo, get in and out real quick, and let you fine folks chat all about it, okay?
Well, technically, I say that there's no good evidence to suggest that a God exists. That would be evidence that's free of logical leaps, fallacies, and ad hoc assumptions. I've investigated all sorts of arguments that apologists have given for either a general definition of a deity or a particular definition of a deity. They all contain at least one of those things that precludes the argument from being good evidence. Or they are just simply wrong. Sometimes these arguments are so ridiculous they're not even wrong. So when I say that there's no evidence for God's existence, what I mean is that there's no good evidence to suggest that a deity does exist. Hopefully they can provide us with better evidence that hasn't already been given to us.
Punch one I'm going to call the info uppercut. When's the last time you walked into a library and asked, hey, where are all the books that have been written by mindless products of natural laws? The librarian would probably laugh at you and tell you that no such books exist. They don't exist because they can't exist. Why not? Because first of all, it's just common sense. The words that form the message in books always originate from a person with a brain.
Yeah, because we have specifically designed languages, either spoken or written, to communicate these messages. It's common sense because everybody knows that a mind is required for this type of communication. Not all types of communication necessarily require a mind in order for those types of communication to exist. For instance, bees see a broader range of the light spectrum. As both bees and flora have evolved together, the flora has developed certain indications that it can give bees to guide them to where the nectar is. This has allowed flowers to survive and thrive by using the bees in order to propagate. This is a type of messaging system that developed independent of a mind. Now, it does require some kind of mind in order to interpret the messages, but what I'm talking about is the development of this communication tool. But also, I would expect the librarian to be confused by what in the fuck he meant. Nobody would ask for a book written by nature because that's a ridiculous thing to ask for. Natural means of communication, directed by any kind of mind, is very different than a designed means of communication like books.
Or to say it a bit more scientifically, the message of the book, the purpose, comes to be understood by the orderly placement of the words, design, and information.
Yeah, because that's how we've designed that particular form of communication to work. I'm not exactly sure where you're going with this argument.
Information. Now, anytime we find info, these basic laws always apply. Number one, matter doesn't spontaneously produce information.
What do you mean by information here? Are you asking whether or not we expect any form of matter to produce forms of communication that are developed by humans? No, we don't. In relation to his book analogy, we don't expect information like that, but just simple facts about matter. I think that those things would exist regardless of whether or not a mind was there to interpret them. It's kind of like the age-old question of if a tree falls in a forest and no one's there to hear it, does it make a sound? Yes, it does, because the falling tree still makes pressure waves in the air that we interpret as sound. Just because we're not there to interpret the message doesn't mean that it doesn't happen. We can interpret a lot of information that's innate to any piece of matter. What color it is, what shape it is in, what sounds does it make, etc. Things like this, in a very general sense, are pieces of information. You see, this is a big problem with creationist apologetics. They never clearly define what they mean by information. They leave the term information in a very general and broad sense, which means that we can make information mean whatever in the fuck we want to. This works against them, though, as I just demonstrated.
Number two, only a mental source, intelligence, can generate new creative information. In other words, just like those books that couldn't originate without a mind, neither could life.
You see, this is one of those logical leaps that I was talking about earlier. When he says, generate new creative information, he means something like a book. He implies that life is similar to books, but that's kind of an inappropriate analogy. Life is created and sustained by chemical processes. Books are not. While we have yet to be able to fully describe the process of abiogenesis, we do know enough to say that life is the result of a natural process. To deny this is to ignore what we scientifically know about life. So to say that life needs a mind in order to arise in the first place is just an argument from ignorance. So far, I am not impressed with their arguments for God. Seems kind of like the same old shit that I've heard from various creationists before.
Why not, you ask? Because we know that DNA contains information. Therefore, the laws of information science apply, which means the information in DNA couldn't have spontaneously generated, and that a mind is behind the information. Period. No exception.
Again, he fails to define what in the fuck he means by information. And I'm also not exactly sure what he means by the laws of information science. Information science is a field of study that deals with human-designed information systems, but it's not a study of, like, DNA information. And I also couldn't find the laws of information science as a phrase from a reputable source. But even if there was such a thing as the laws of information science, I sincerely doubt that it would exclude natural occurrences of what we would interpret as information. This is one of those ad hoc assumptions that they throw in there in order to sound convincing. Information science is context dependent, and from what I can tell, there's no generalized laws associated with the field. However, I have found the exact phrase, laws of information science, from creationist organizations. Where it most likely originated from was a book called In the Beginning There Was Information. And this comes directly from a faith-based publishing house. They seem to only publish books that push Christian theology. So this seems to be a somewhat flashy phrase that creationists use in order to sound scientific. This kind of arbitrary creation of laws makes them seem dishonest, and it makes their argument ad hoc and fallacious.
Look at it this way. The simplest life form we know of is an amoeba, and it contains as much information in its DNA as 1,000 complete sets of Encyclopedia Britannica. So, are we to believe that there's no way a message in a library book could spontaneously generate, but far more complicated messages in DNA that contain 1,000 times more information could have? Not likely.
The DNA information is completely different from the information contained in books. Whew, I never knew I was gonna have to make that distinction clear to somebody, but here we fucking are. You see, we can interpret DNA sequences as information because those sequences cause a certain set of chemical reactions to happen. And then there's an effect to those chemical reactions. This kind of cause and effect allows us to understand DNA as information. Obviously, DNA contains a lot of genetic information, but this information is definitely naturally produced. DNA is a chemical, and it's governed by the laws of physics and chemistry. Books are not. Well, besides the fact of, I can throw a book across the room, and that's governed by physics. But, you understand what I'm talking about.
You see, when it comes to life or anything else that contains information, the laws of information science confirm the necessity of a creative mind.
Well, considering that creationists have ad hoc created these laws of information science, it makes a lot of sense that these laws would only ever come to the conclusion that God is necessary. It just exposes how dishonest they really are about this topic. Information doesn't necessarily require a mind to exist, but it does require a mind in order to interpret the information into something meaningful. Otherwise, it's just meaningless noise.
And guess what? In the very first book of the Bible, it just happens to mention that. In the beginning, God created. Bam. Uppercut lands on the chin.
Well, when you create a set of scientific laws in order to point towards the necessity of a deity, then yeah, it's pretty obvious that it's going to confirm whatever in the fuck the Bible says. But what you're not factoring in here is the fact that there are other creation deities. Like in Egyptian mythology, Atum blew his load and created the universe. Another deity in Egyptian mythology that is a bit more relevant is Ptah. I say it's related because Ptah actually created the universe with the word, or the logos, or the exact same shit that Yahweh did. My point is that he makes a logical leap from the universe had a beginning to Yahweh created the universe. This is the exact kind of shit that I'm tired of. Could they actually connect their thoughts with some goddamn evidence? Don't just ad hoc assert that they are true with no evidence other than, my Bible says.
And now here comes the indefensible head blow. We'll call this the Nada Big Bang Bing swing, the KO to the claim that there's no evidence of God, the law of causality, left hook of doom. It goes like this. Everything that had a beginning had a cause. The universe had a beginning, therefore the universe had a cause. Now, either something caused the universe to come into existence, or nothing caused it. I might not be the smartest guy behind the telescope, but honest, practical, everyday thinking's going to lead me to the former. You have to work pretty hard to conjure up a way that nothing did it.
First of all, he seems to think his arguments are stronger than they actually are. This is not a left hook of doom to the discussion. The scientific explanation of what caused the universe to inflate is not nothing. The kind of nothing that he's talking about doesn't actually exist. So this just turns into a straw man argument. The actual nothing that we perceive in reality still has a slight electrical charge to it. This means there's still a little bit of energy inside of an area that has nothing in it. The scientific explanation for the inflation of the universe actually concerns quantum mechanics. You see, there was this quantum scalar field that was in a false vacuum state, and then at some point it fluctuated from this false vacuum state into a true vacuum state, thereby releasing an immense amount of energy, near instantaneously inflating our universe and filling it with a type of energy that we refer to as inflaton particles. These inflaton particles would then transform into what we would come to understand as the energy and matter that we have today. So yes, nothing could have inflated our universe. It's vastly more probable and plausible than an old wizard speaking an incantation in order to create shit.
You see, it's pretty improbable, nigh impossible, to account for design, information, and cause if the universe just exploded from nothing.
No, it's not. I just explained how the inflation of the universe could have naturally occurred. Nature only appears to be designed, so we don't really need a god in order to explain it. It's legit just how reality works without a god.
Smack. And while we're on the topic, where did the matter come from that exploded? Are we really to believe that there was nothing and then it exploded, and now the exploded nothing is something, and we just happen to be smart enough to discover and understand the very laws that prove the opposite? And if the general understanding of the law of cause and effect is true, how can matter come from a lesser cause like nothing?
Considering how this nothing that you keep talking about doesn't really exist, so I don't see how it can be a lesser cause, or a cause at all. Einstein showed us that we can represent matter as energy. The quantum fluctuation that released the immense amount of energy that filled our universe and inflated it near instantaneously partially transformed into the matter that we have today. Because again, matter is just a different form of energy. This is a perfectly reasonable, rational, and natural explanation. Far better than wizard spells.
I mean, come on. I don't have a bunch of letters after my name, but even a monkey knows better. And yeah, I snuck in a couple of extra jabs in there, so sue me.
So, your claim to how simple your solution is to the complicated nature of the beginning of our universe is that a monkey can understand it? I don't think this works in your favor like you think it does.
Now for some parting words from our sponsor, the Bible. It tells us in Romans 1:20 that since the creation of the world, God's invisible attributes are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so they are without excuse. It also says that people actually know the truth, but they reject it, which explains why even though there's overwhelming evidence that there is a God, evidence won't convince the unwilling. Sad but true.
This hasn't been overwhelming evidence, though. And him clutching his Bible and claiming that we just don't want to believe is ridiculous. Atheists have obviously done our research and have just come away being unconvinced of this evidence that creationists and apologists in general love to throw in our direction. The Bible clutching is just the height of laziness and cognitive dissonance. The Bible is the shield against new information. Ha ha!
So there you have it. With just a couple of meaningful blows, the claim that there is no evidence for God is down for the count, mi amigos. In other words, it's been debunked. Adios.
It hasn't really been debunked, though. This video has only presented arguments that atheists have already considered. In fact, all of these arguments are generic arguments for God that have really been overplayed. Earlier, when I said that there's no good evidence to suggest that a God does exist, that included every single argument that they presented in this video. I am very unimpressed with these basic-ass cosmological and teleological arguments. Screaming, look at the trees! would have done the exact same thing. So I guess I'm going to continue my search for good evidence for God's existence, because obviously reasons for hope are not going to present them, because they don't have good arguments. They don't have good evidence. There's nothing that suggests that a deity does exist. But I would love to read what you heathens thought of their arguments. If you will, please go down below into the comments and let me know what you thought. Do you think that they had some good arguments, or do you think they were all pretty much trash? Let me know down below. And hey, while you're down there, why don't you smash that like button and subscribe if you like this kind of video. Don't forget to stand up and use your voice. Bye, heathens.